When you hear the line,
"They were scary. The numbers were scary."
there are plenty of mundane interpretations you might be able to come up with. Maybe the numbers in question represent a pollution statistic or a death count. But within the context of this scene in Severance, that isn't what the numbers were scary means. What's scary isn't any information the numbers imply. It's the numbers themselves, their appearance on the computer screen. It's a fantastical idea on the scale of a single sentence. Author Samuel R. Delany points out that in this way, science fiction is something which happens at the level of language, that content is the illusion myriad stylistic factors create when viewed at a certain distance. Any serious discussion of speculative fiction must first get away from the distracting concept of SF content and examine precisely what sort of word beast sits before us. One name for this particular word beast is catachresis, the literary device wherein words are misused, often in ways which create a strained or mixed metaphor. Building on Delany and others, science fiction studies scholar Seo-Young argues that this kind of catachresis is the fabric that constitutes the genre, that science fiction is innately lyrical and poetic. She writes, "Within the narrative universe of SF, the literal and the metaphoric share ontological status. Like the metaphor, SF is counter-literal. Both metaphor and SF bring into imagined existence things non-existent in the world of literal facts. But SF is also counter-figurative, displacing the ordinary attributes of figurative language, its weightlessness, virtuality, as-ifness, dependence on cognitive labor, with the vivacity, solidity, presence, and givenness that characterize the perceptible world of literal facts." Film and television, which on the micro level that we're discussing at the moment, rather than the macro level of narrative structure, are in 2025 the same medium, consist not of words which form sentences, but of images which form sequences. In attempting to theorize sci-fi film, the specter of content once again looms. Can one define the genre without gesturing toward the presence of spaceships and robots as specific, coherent images in and of themselves? Film scholar Vivian Sobchack posits that the visual surface of all SF film presents us with a confrontation between and mixture of those images to which we respond as alien and those we know to be familiar, which gets us closer to a workable definition. A robot is alien, but the landscape it inhabits is not necessarily on a visual level. This brings us back to Severance, though, because there are few figures captured by the show's camera that are alien in this way. Rather, what's science-fictional is the ways in which they are combined. Neither a goat nor an office hallway are otherworldly in and of themselves. It's placing these images in the same frame that produces what Sobchack calls a visual tension. Let's take the opening sequence as an example. A woman awakens, not on a bed but on a table. Yet despite the table and chairs implying some kind of office space, the walls of the room are padded. Taken all together, it is a distinctly science-fictional image. This room is for some purpose which does not make sense within the framework of the real world, and we, along with Helly, slowly learn what it is for. An office room built for waking up in makes sense in a world where you can never leave the office. Because, as it turns out, employees at this company are severed. Their minds have been divided into a work self and a home self, referred to as innies and outies, wherein each self has no memory of the other part of their life. The severance procedure is a proprietary technology of their employer, Lumen Industries. Core to the show's identity is the elevator, the liminal space between the two worlds and the two selves of each severed employee. When a character changes from their outie to their innie or vice versa, the show uses a dolly zoom, zooming in while moving the camera away or zooming out while moving the camera closer to communicate this. The resultant change in focal length is a visual contained within the camera itself. For a different example, the presence of a character in a shot is communicating a diegetic fact, that the character is in the room. Whereas the specific decision to position that character in the center of the image, rather than framing her on the 2/3, is a choice that might have thematic significance, but isn't telling us anything about what is literally happening. It's happening only in the extra-diegetic context of the camera frame. With the elevator shots, a technique that we would otherwise understand as stylistic is communicating information about the story world. Once this meaning has been established, the show can communicate the switch very quickly. Sometimes this includes the elevator ding, even when not in the elevator. The sound dislocated from its literal context. Another instance of audio-visual catachresis. Severance uses the language of film, on the moment-to-moment level, to create science fiction. Of course, Severance also does plenty of more traditional sci-fi writing within the text of its dialogue. At times, the show plays with these layered possibilities of language. The same line read through mundane and science-fictional interpretations has different meanings.
Mark, you're good people.
In particular, the Innies' limited knowledge of the outside world leads them to imagine the mundane as science-fictional. When one of their co-workers claims that during her time outside, she encountered a night gardener, a delightful combination of words, no one immediately challenges her. Similarly, in the season 2 finale, Helly and the main character Mark discuss
the equator. Is that a building?
Or a continent.
Maybe it's just a building that's, like, so big.
which is absurd and naive, except of course that these two live in the labyrinth of hallways that is the severed floor, a building that sometimes seems so vast it may as well cover a continent. One of the defining aesthetics of said floor is a retro flavor to the technology. Lumen's offices are full of record players, landline telephones, bulky desktop computer monitors. But Mark on the outside owns a smartphone. This show is set in some version of the present day. Petey, whose attempted reintegration of his two selves is the show's inciting incident, has a flip phone. I assume, in-universe, it's a burner phone he obtained when he went on the run, but it also makes sense for him as a character suspended between the show's two worlds. Partially, I think, the aesthetic of old-fashioned tech is Severance harkening back to a kind of office culture that maybe no longer exists. We only ever hear Keir Egan, the founder and figurehead of Lumen, through heavy audio processing, first as a museum recording, then a pseudo-video game screen. By season 2, we hear his voice non-diegetically, and it's still the same. Outdated technology stands in for the past writ large. But also, such devices more easily act as symbols of their respective purposes. My smartphone still uses the silhouette of a landline receiver to signify its phone app. And so within the science-fictional world of Lumen, where, as Chu told us, the literal and the metaphoric share ontological status, these technologies are a natural fit. Severed employees, of course, have no access to their own pasts. As a result, information about their lives outside Lumen is a valued commodity, doled out to them as one form of wellness session wherein
Some facts about your outing
are presented as contextless lists. Said lists have a kind of hypnotic quality to them, more sound than substance. It's all very Voight-Kampff test.
Do you remember protocol?
Is that the first question?
No, we haven't started yet.
You're in a desert, walking along in the sand when all of a
Is
sudden...
this the test now?
Yes, you're in a desert.
If you were caught in a mudslide, would you be more afraid of suffocating or drowning?
Drowning.
In the context of Blade Runner, that test is intended to determine whether the subject is a human or a robot, to draw the boundaries between a person and something that isn't one, even when both can talk and laugh and love as convincingly as the other, even when, apparently, the only difference is these tiny details of behavior. Blade Runner's replicants can trace their lineage back to the birth of robot fiction as we now know it, in the stage play R.U.R, about a company which produces artificial workers. As one scholar, Juliana Strauss puts it, robots in the play represent an ideal workforce as imagined by capitalists, effective, cheap, tireless, submissive, and in fact, rather resembling slaves more than wage laborers. Strauss is correct here, but it is easy to overstate the radicalness of R.U.R.'s politics. It is ultimately a story where the one thing strong enough to prevail against the machine of capitalism is the redemptive power of heterosexual reproduction. Nevertheless, the play's influence on subsequent robot stories of a wide variety of political persuasions cannot be ignored. One element of R.U.R. that later writers haven't tended to borrow is that its robots are not explicitly metal machines in the way that we think of robots now. The implication seems to be that they're created through some more mysterious alchemy, and visually are indistinguishable from humans. Seo-Young Chu's model of science fiction as narrative poetry has an important layer to it which I have not yet discussed, which is that its complex form of metaphor makes the genre uniquely capable of telling stories about ideas which are difficult to wrap one's head around. Such cognitively estranging reference encompass the sublime, e.g. outer space, virtual entities, cyberspace, realities imperceptible to the human brain, the fourth dimension, and events so overwhelming that they escape immediate experience, shell shock. Although impossible to assess empirically, cyberspace cannot be weighed on a scale, traumatic experience cannot be qualified in units of time, these references can, have, and do become available for representation in SF. R.U.R. is not about artificial people, it's about labor and exploitation, as is Severance. To be more specific, Severance's primary cognitively estranging referent, that is to say, the real thing being referred to via the catachrestic technique of science fiction narrative, is the artificial divide between work and the rest of life under contemporary capitalism. It takes me that many words to begin to describe it. Within the metaphor of the show, it's just called Severance. Mark's boss in Season 1 is also his next-door neighbor. He, of course, is unaware of this connection between his two lives, and so Cobell is able to surveil her employee off hours without him ever knowing. She artificially recreates the effects of severance, using separate identities for work and home. But in her case, this division is an illusion. Lumen rules her entire life. She keeps a shrine to Kier in her home. She hums the Kier anthem to Mark's baby niece. There is no moment which is not about the work for her. At the beginning of the show, Mark's wife Gemma is believed to be dead. The two of them first met through their shared work at a nearby university. At one point, in flashback, we watch Mark take the elevator into work to see Gemma. For them, the domestic sphere dominates even their work lives. A few episodes later, in the present of the show, Mark once again takes an elevator to see Gemma. She is not dead, but instead kidnapped by Lumen, and he must descend beyond the severed floor to rescue her. This elevator, though, does trigger a switch, and in the split second where Mark's body goes slack, the weapon he's holding fires, killing the Lumen manager he's taken hostage. The specificity of this sequence of events has the strange effect that neither Mark is responsible for Drummond's death. Rather, Severance itself commits the murder. This show is full of violence, but it's the kind of insidious, systemic violence that never names itself as such. It's not that they're forcing you to be here, it's just that you won't exist if you leave. A death threat by another name. Lumen is all about implication without ever saying things in such unpleasant terms.
We never used words like that. With Lumen, it's very specific language.
So when Mark spends the last part of Season 2 drenched in blood, it feels like the most truthful thing that's happened all season. He's able to call Lumen's bluff, to cut through the social niceties to the visceral reality of his situation. The distance provided by cameras and computer screens is no longer enough to separate the higher-ups from those they're exploiting. Sobchack's book on science fiction film was first published in 1980 and then re-released in 1987 with an additional chapter discussing how the genre had shifted. In it, she writes, "In a culture where nearly everyone is regularly alienated from a direct sense of self, lived experience commonly mediated by an electronic technology that dominates both the domestic sphere and the private or personal realm of the unconscious, when everyone is less conscious of existence than of its image, the once threatening SF alien and other become our familiars, our close relations, if not ourselves." The point of view character for much of R.U.R. is a young woman named Helena, the daughter of a powerful man who has come to see the factory for herself and ensure the robots good treatment. One of the robots in the play was built to resemble Helena. She even shares her name. She's her mirror image, her shadow, her twin, both more and less human than the original ever was. J.P. Talot, in an article on robot duplicates in film, traces the idea back to science fiction's early origins in Gothic literature, or at least to the enduring confusion and the popular imagination that attributes the single name of Frankenstein to both a monster and its creator. Mirror duplicates are, of course, a central motif of Severance. This is most emphasized in the Season 2 episode Woe's Hollow, where the team are haunted by silent doubles and told a fable about Kier's twin. But the innies are not quite their Outies' twins, nor their shadows. Mark was under the impression that his job at Lumen is something to do with his background as a historian, that the work his innie did was the kind of work he would have been hired for himself, that the robot was a mirror of its creator rather than his own person. This isn't the case, and the end of Season 2 further refutes this line of thinking when Mark chooses the person he's in love with over his other self's wife. There are differences created by their respective circumstances that will be difficult to overcome. No robot built for a purpose can be an exact replica of its maker. Early on in each season of Severance, the deputy manager of the severed floor has the innies play an icebreaker with a red ball. It's a simple game. When it's your turn, you have to share a fact about yourself. This is odd when you think about it. Why encourage the innies to develop a sense of identity when that's the exact thing Lumen has stolen from them? But it is useful for them to have a sense of self because their selfhood can then be sculpted to the company's ends. In R.U.R, it's explained that while robots are not people, they do experience pain. To ensure they don't damage themselves, of course. They are allowed the elements of personhood which make them better tools.
They're gonna turn us off like fucking machines. You've seen them do it.
As in poetry, a figurative image in science fiction can over time become cliché, can cease to reference anything but itself. Robotics as a concept now far outreaches any anti-capitalist readings we could make of R.U.R. To describe the same referent, we need new metaphors.